Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Table Talk podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Ron Luce, and just want to share a little bit before we jump in. I know we have a lot tuning in from our Gathering Place church family in all different places, but Ron has been really a father of faith in my life, and I know in the life of so many. I can remember attending my first Acquire the Fire youth event in Lexington, Kentucky, and there was just thousands of teenagers encountering God. And really, Ron and Teen Mania Acquire the Fire, they've reached really millions, literally millions of teenagers and shaped a generation. And it's really my honor to sit down, to interview him, catch up with him, where he's at, what he's doing. In 2010, I attended the Honor Academy, and it was a year-long internship, an intensive internship to really grow in your faith, encounter God. I also met my wife when I was there. We now, really 10 years later, have been married 6 years, have 2 kids, and we both really found our call in ministry in that time at the Honor Academy. So it's my great privilege to introduce to you Ron Luce. I want you to check out this little video. If you've never heard of him, this will introduce kind of who he is and what he's all about.
It's all about me. It's about my space and my face and my face on my space. Don't worry about that stuff. Because I'm calling you to have a different set of values.
Get rid of everything that you have that you think makes your life great without me, and then you'll see what you really need.
If you dare step out of your comfort zone and dream God's dream, man, you're in for the ride of your life. Not just a great weekend, but an incredible life.
So when we started Acquire the Fire, our heart was, let's reach as many young people and give them an encounter with Jesus, a presentation of Christ that they will never forget. It's the same message that comes from the Bible, but it is fresh, and it is alive, and it is real, and it is relatable to a young generation.
We were designed to be submerged in God's love. And when we don't know that God loves us, we're just like that fish, flopping around, out of water. Help, help, this is not normal.
When you watch enough television and enough media, enough internet, enough dumbed-down reading, you'll find yourself singing the blues. I just can't hear his voice on my MySpace or MTV. Oh, no, no. I've got the dream killer blues.
You're with me in the middle of a war. Crouch down. Bombs are going off, rocket-propelled grenades. And then all of a sudden you look back and you see your commander. He jumps in the ditch with you. This is what he does because he knows you can't walk to what he does. He grabs you.
I used to have a dream.
And he runs.
This is exactly what Jesus did for you, for me.
I've been singing a long time for you.
This is the mark of ownership, right? And in a very real way, Stephen, this is exactly what all these different brands that we've been talking about, this is what their desire is to do to you.
Happen to you. Come on, Ashley, take us somewhere tonight.
Well, if he gives me free pizza, we don't need pizza, we need God! That's what we need! Jesus was constantly, every conversation going, do you realize you need God? Do you realize you need forgiveness? Do you realize you need life on the inside? Because when you know you need something, you do whatever it takes. Is Jesus on your need list or your want list?
I feel so clean now. Devil's off my hands now.
Good for you.
Glory to God.
So listen, you need to go get in the Word and get purity scriptures and cram them down your heart, into your heart. Okay, that's where you get power to stay free.
You know, no one came up to me and said, now Ron, don't you be a party animal anymore. Stop that drinking. No one said that to me. But I stopped. You know why? Because when you really fall in love with Jesus, you fall out of love with the world. I'm praying that that is what happens to you, that you fall so head over heels, freak of nature, in love with the Son of God, that you don't care what anybody else thinks.
Hey, well, we want to welcome everyone tuning in today to Table Talk with Pastor Garrett. We're thankful you're here. And we especially want to welcome everyone tuning in from the Exponential Pastors page, as well as the Thankful HA alumni, and of course, our Gathering Place Church family. We love you. We're thankful you're here. And I am excited to introduce, maybe even reintroduce, none other than Ron Luce. Ron, we're thankful you're here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Garrett, and great to see you. And it's been quite a few years since you were an intern back at Teen Mania, but here you are leading a church and doing quite an apt job. So congratulations.
No, I really appreciate that, and really appreciate you taking the time. As I was sharing with you a little bit ago, you've been really a father of faith in my life, and I know, and really a whole generation through the Acquire the Fires, Global Expeditions, the camps, the Honor Academy, all that Teen Mania really impacted an entire generation. And so the vision, obviously, that God gave you years ago of raise up an army of young people to change the world. I like to say was a part of that army of being equipped and trained. And now here we are on the front lines. And I know we're going to have a lot of young pastors that are going to be tuning in, a lot of young business leaders, really that came to a relationship, became a follower of Christ at a Teen Mania event. And so we're kind of excited to see where you are, Ron, kind of reconnecting with you. So why don't you just take a minute and kind of catch everybody up, what you've been a part of. We know you recently authored a new book. Tell us a little bit about where you're at and a little bit about Faith at the Speed of Light.
Well, that's a great setup. Anybody would want to set up like that, Garrett.
Yeah.
So, if you're watching this and you were part of Teen Mania in some way, whether that at an Acquire the Fire, on a mission trip, in the Honor Academy, an internship sometime, that was an amazing season of, say, 3 decades. Saw some 3 million young people come to Acquire the Fires, 80,000 young people on mission trips, about 7,000 through the internship. And together, we all impacted a lot of people, all the staff and people that were part for all those years. And as you well know, anybody that was ever part of that, we were running and gunning all the time. I mean, next event. People couldn't believe we would do so many events.
Right.
Ministries couldn't believe it. People still can't believe you did how many a year? And there we were. And with all the amazing impact God graced us with to impact so many lives, it was a lot more like ready, fire, aim kind of thing. We all know that we were just working hard, trying to reach as many people as we could, helping pastors and youth pastors, get on fire, get their youth groups on fire, things like that. And so the pivot now is still involved in, really deeply care about getting the gospel to the next generation. And I know more data off the top of my head than you'll probably ever want to know as far as what's really happening with youth around the world. But the pivot is thinking about it more strategically rather than just do as much as you can do. Let's be smart about what we do, and let's think deeply about how we impact them. I used to think, well, we just get an encounter with God, it's all over. Well, it's not, though, because that's just the beginning. An encounter with God is the beginning of a relationship. And I kept thinking, well, if they just had an encounter like I had an encounter with God, well, then everything will be great. God will take it from there. Well, but that's really not how Jesus built the church. It was to be connected with people, to walk together, to continue to press into him. And so now we're working a lot more, trying to help leaders think strategically about, okay, we need to reach the next generation. But let's think deeply about how do we reach them? And once they're reached, how do we keep them engaged? What does reach even mean? And how do we really dream about, it doesn't mean, the idea used to be, well, just have a cool youth group, just have an on fire youth group, just have a rowdy youth group, and then you've reached them. Really? Have you? Because look at how many of those didn't stick with their faith and all of that kind of thing. And so, in other words, in the past years, it was more like heavy on activity, light on strategy. Now we're just flip-flop. We're light on activity, heavy on strategy. And so we just did Jesus Global Youth Day in August of last year. Yeah. Had a lot of people come. We planned it for like 3 years. 50,000 came from 30 different nations. We had churches sign up to be a download site all around the world, like 101,000 churches. So there were millions and millions, maybe up to 10 million youth that got reached. And so we put a lot of planning into how to reach a lot, but really it was less about that event. That event is more about, was to wake up pastors to say, whenever I have a big event, it gets people's attention for a minute. And while we have their attention, let's give them something that's like a seed. So part of the event we did for just senior pastors, 3,500 were there. And we had leaders coming from around the world that are leading exponential churches that I documented in my book, Faith at the Speed of Light, whose churches are growing exponentially, not just in size, but in depth. They're making not just disciples, but they're making disciple makers. And what is their systems? How do they do that? So that we're not just saying, reach young people. It's like reach and disciple, reach and develop so they can lead. And so anyways, that's a lot of the pivot. The book came out of my doctoral studies that I just finished at Regent University. It was my final dissertation. They let me write it in common vernacular, so it wasn't just eggheads reading it. So it really examines, what do these best practices of the churches around the world that think exponentially, what do they have in common, and how can you apply that to your church wherever you live around the world?
No, that's wonderful. And I think one thing you've always done well throughout the year, Ron, and recently talking to my youth pastor of 20 years who took us to the youth events and took us to global expedition trips for 10 years straight. I know the times that you would have the breakout sessions with youth pastors and the times of encouragement on GE trips, how Team India would pour into leaders has always been, I think, a hallmark of that ministry, that it wasn't just about reaching youth, reaching teenagers, but it was always the equipping, the encouragement, the renewals that the leaders would get, and then being able to experience the fruit of all the hard work, seeing the life change, seeing the altar moments, seeing the ATF signatures of their students yelling, "I want the cross." Really beautiful moments that took place at these events. And I know we have a lot tuning in right now of maybe a teenager who went to acquire the fire. They made a decision to follow Jesus, and that really sparked a love for God. That encounter that took place led them into discipleship, and they might not be in ministry, but they are a leader of sorts, whether in business or as a spouse or a husband. Ron, if you could just take a moment before we get into the content today of leading through crisis, maybe just encourage that teenager that came to an event. Maybe encourage that leader that took a group on a mission trip. Maybe just encourage them during this time that they're having to pivot. They're having to really, maybe they're quarantined with their families or their kids. Maybe just take a moment and encourage that leader or that parent, that husband, that wife during this time.
Well, a lot of times when we have an encounter with the Lord when we're young, maybe we're 15 or 16 and now you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, we think, oh, that's when I was young. Oh, it was just, that was a youth groupie thing or whatever. But really and truly, I'm not a teenager anymore. And I still covet time with the Lord, in intimacy with the Lord, growth in the Lord. And so it's really not, just a thing you do when you're young. It's an opportunity to kind of live on a different wavelength, the way the Lord designed for us as humans to live. So I just encourage you during this shutdown time, to shut down and like maybe reconnect with the Lord a little bit and go, if you think about, and maybe you're an alumni or something, this has happened to you where maybe you drift a little bit or whatever. A lot of people are doing puzzles right now and, to kind of beat the time. And so I've been doing with my family, and, when you're doing a puzzle, pieces, sometimes they seem to fit, but they don't really seem to fit. Maybe that's how you've been in your career or in your ministry. Like, I'm sort of doing this and I've got these, and it sort of fits, but it's like the right color, but it doesn't really fit. And this is a great time to kind of push away and look at the other puzzle pieces of your life, or what did God speak to you? If you're an intern, an alumni, you'll know what this means. The Holy Ghost brainstorm, pull that out. What are the different pieces that the Lord has spoken to you about in the past? Pieces of what you're supposed to be a part of, and wrestle through those and pray with those. It's amazing when you're doing a puzzle, there can be a puzzle piece right like 2 inches away that totally fits, but you don't see it. And then you turn it around, and after an hour, you go, oh my gosh, it fits right there. And it's amazing. I was thinking about this, how much time we're spending on this stupid puzzle. I like it because it connects with a different part of your brain.
Yeah.
And sometimes we spend more time on a physical puzzle that means nothing. You just crunch it back up and put it in a box than we do on our own calling, on our own life, on the puzzle pieces of our life that God is trying to fit together. And you won't get it unless you wrestle and pray and fast, and maybe talk to some counselors or friends or people that will, kind of challenge you and that kind of thing. So really encourage you to do that. Also, just to the leaders out there, you mentioned the youth pastors that came to events and things like that.
Yeah.
One of my biggest frustrations all of the years of Acquire the Fire, pastors and youth pastors would come up and go, how do we do this in our church? How do we get our kids on fire like this all the time?
Yeah.
And I didn't know what to tell them. And the problem is because, I know how to do events. I know how to get all these people from different churches and focus on the Lord and take them on a journey and that kind of thing. Yeah. But the problem is I couldn't see it in the context of a local church, because the construct of what we call church and youth group, I think, is so janky in terms of it's the way it's always been. It's kind of developed. It is what it is. And we just want a better version of that. And what I've discovered now with some of these case studies from around the world is it's like an eagle in flight, a church that knows how to reach and develop and young people and keep them on fire. So you could say it like this. We're trying to help people take what happened at Acquire the Fire and make it localized in a local church, but not just so that it's an event, but it's something that keeps burning and burning and burning and burning.
Right.
And this is a great time because of this pandemic. It's freaked everybody out. It's forced a paradigm shift on us. Like something that started small, went all around the world. And then, church via the internet and live, people never thought about doing it and that kind of thing. So while we're in the middle of shifting paradigm, let's keep thinking about what are other paradigms that could be stunting our growth personally, our growth ministry-wise, and be willing to shift some things differently that might really totally leverage our life in a different way.
No, very true, and great segue. And as we're talking today, Ron, we're talking about leading through crisis. And obviously on a ministry standpoint, local young lead pastor, we had small elements of streaming in place, but then we really had to dig in deep and kind of get our team together and say, hey, how can we make this effective? How can we make it excellent? And how can we really communicate the gospel via technology, where maybe it was just one angle of what we did, but now it's really the vehicle that our church is going to be able to minister. Even like us doing this Zoom call, we've seen how technology like Zoom, like Google Hangouts and things, that is the now norm of connection. So, and what you talk about in your book, Faith at the Speed of Light, your heart through the book is you've done all these case studies, you've connected with leaders all over the world. You've connected with churches, even in all your years of Acquire the Fires, and now really kind of putting an intentional focus on really the youth of the nations. Is what your heart through all of this is not just to survive, not just to exist, but how can we thrive while this wave of change is hitting. Now, we've all been, as you were just sharing, our paradigm has been forced to change. I shared this Sunday, even in our Easter message, that in order to change our position, we have to change our perspective. So perspectives are changing. Leaders are having to change if they want to really move from a place of just trying to ride the wave out, just let it rush over you and just hold your breath and get through it. But we've seen that this is a crisis where you just can't hold your breath and pray it goes away, or close your eyes and praise it goes away. But we're having to learn to kind of rise to the occasion. And we hear it all the time that leaders really aren't made in times of crisis, but they're revealed. So we're seeing through the crisis that the reality of our organizations, the reality of our churches, the reality of our business, we're really having to hone in and see what we are made of. So Ron, if you could just speak to the leader that's riding the wave of change, of reaching their clients in new ways. We talked about this, that there's a lot of churches innovating right now. They're doing drive-in services.
they're really making updates and upgrades in their tech and the way they're reaching online. But if you could really encourage that leader that is innovating, encourage that business leader that is being creative, what are some practical principles they can be putting in place right now where they can go from just allowing the wave to hit them to where they can get on the board and ride it?
Well, imagine that I've gone to the beach, and maybe you've been to the beach before. Hey, I'm going to go for a swim. You're out swimming around, and before you know it, you've kind of drifted away from the shore, and you can barely see the shoreline behind you. And then you hear this crash, and you look at this crashing noise, and you look, and behind you, there's like an 80-foot wall of water. You're on the top of the crest of this wave, and you start swimming as fast as you can away from that, because who wants to fall on that, at least if you're not a surfer.
Right.
And you're frantic. You're swimming as fast as you can. And while you're trying to swim away from it, it sucks you under, and you kind of get into this horizontal like tornado. It's throwing you around and around, and every once in a while it throws you up. You gasp for air, and it pulls you back down, and around and around. And you gasp for air, and it pulls you back down. And one of the times you gasp, you come up, you look around, and you go, hey, there's my friends, there's my family. Then it pulls you back down, and you realize they're trying to do the same thing, swim away from the edge, but they're getting pulled into it. And then you're in it for so long, you come up, and you're like, well, we're not going anywhere. We might as well have lunch here, and then we might as well have dinner here. And then you realize 10 years later, you've been in this tornado of change, this horizontal tornado, this tidal wave of change. Welcome to our future. Because imagine every time you close your eyes, you open, the world's different. That's how fast change is coming. Because my whole doctoral degree was about strategic foresight. And that is the science of how do you identify the trends that are going to most impact any given ministry or industry, and then how do you prepare for those trends? And so we think right now with COVID and the pandemic, oh, look at all the change. It's just the beginning. There's so much change. It's unbelievable. They say that that only 40% of Fortune 500 companies will even be around in 10 years. They're going to go out of business because they won't be able to keep up with the pace of change. We think of things like Uber and Airbnb, things like that have become billion-dollar companies overnight. They actually don't own any assets except what they've done. We call it's called the knowledge revolution. Knowledge is increasing in every sector. It's doubling. Everything we know about space and nanotechnology, every industry is doubling every year. Imagine driving by the Library of Congress, and every year it doubles in size and doubles in size. And not only is knowledge growing, except for in medical world, it's actually doubling every 80 days. But not only is it doubling every year, the rest of it, it's being digitized and then analyzed with AI and everything else. And so what that's producing is the ability for change. And a lot of people are trying to use it for the good of the world. The point is, with so much change in business, so much change in the way people think, the way people interact, we think, oh, there's a new social media app, and what are we going to do with our kids? That's usually, but that's like the tip of the iceberg of the real change, the fundamental changes. They're saying that, think about 80 years of the Industrial Revolution, the third wave of it, crammed into 20. That's how dramatic the next 20 years are going to be. And so if we're going to be leaders, we got to understand the moment. You know, Chronicles talks about the sons of Issachar understood the times that Israel lived in. They knew what they should do. So we're going to have to understand the times that we're in, and then try to ascertain what do we do. So, you know, some pastors just figured out there's an internet, last week, and they go, oh, we better get a website. No, seriously, it took so long for pastors and for people in ministry. A couple of years ago, Google hosted a thing for ministry, mega church leaders, big mega church leaders there. I knew one of the guys that was there, and they had all their muckety muck at Google come, and one guy was a Christian that kind of organized this thing. So there's about 20 churches there, and one of the guys got up who wasn't a Christian, one of the Google guys, and said, and he knew everybody's name and everybody's church, every detail about it, because he'd done the research, and he said, this just shows these are churches that would be technologically advanced, you would think. And he said, why do you think it's so important that everybody wants to know how many locations you have? Because the guy that's Googling your church name He doesn't
Right.
care how many locations you have. Why do you use your space on your opening page? They care,
Yeah.
is there one near me? And how is it going to affect my life? And
Yeah.
you know, you can find, you can know where they're Googling from, where they're searching from, and just bring up the locations that's near them. And this is not new technology. This is like 10 years old.
Right.
And this is what he's saying to them. Like, and these are the most advanced churches, and giving them a glimpse, like, you're not even using old technology yet. So
Right.
our opportunity is, and what kind of my whole hope is for the future of leaders, teaching them to think exponentially, how to surf the wave of change. The whole title of the book, Faith at the Speed of Light. Everything seems like it's changing at the speed of light.
Yeah.
How do we keep our faith intact and help others' faith while everything seems to be changing so quickly? So anyways, I think we have to add it to our job description. I call it being a future fit leader. You can't just leave it to people that study future trends. We've all got to add that to our knapsack or our toolkit of how do we make sure that we're on the cusp and on the crest of the wave, so that we're not doing something that looks like the Stone Ages in just 5 years.
Right. No, well said. And I think this book couldn't come at a more really relevant time. And you even mentioned how kind of these additional waves, and it's not usually just one wave, it's several waves. My brother, he owns a business, and he was talking with one of his clients, and he so happens to be, and this was kind of when the whole virus came out, he happens to be a pandemic coordinator for a Fortune 500 company. And he was striking up some conversation, and he just began to ask, obviously this is your field of study. What do you see through this virus? And he was kind of talking through really the previous times, the Spanish flu that happened. And if you study into the Spanish flu, you would see that it wasn't the first wave of the flu that caused the millions of death, but it was the second wave of how the flu then mutated. And then people thought they kind of got through the first wave, then they got out of their homes, they got out of their quarantines. And then that's when the rush of this mutation hit. And that's where we saw the fatalities and things. And so his biggest caution is, and again, he manages warehouses it's a steel company that has warehouses in China and all over America. And he's saying that they're already looking past this first wave, similar to what you're talking about, that when you're having a future mindset, you see the present and you deal with reality, but you're already trying to stay 3 steps ahead, 10 steps ahead for what is this now second wave, because odds are this virus will mutate. Vaccines are anywhere from 18 months to 5 years away from what studies will tell us. So as really leaders are trying to maintain, survive, step up to this place of now thriving in the middle of pandemic, trying to think, okay, how long are our ministries going to be positioned like this? How long are our businesses going to be positioned like this? Really, what starts to surface up, and I know what does in my heart, is trying to lead into the unknown, trying to lead into a territory you don't feel maybe gifted for or equipped for. Ron, if you could speak to how do we lead in the season of unknowns, or how do we lead when we don't feel like we know how to lead?
Well, that's a great question. And I want to just say, this is what leaders were born for. See, I think too much of our leadership has been comfortable. Like, hey, I know how to do that job. I got trained for it. Now I'm in that job, or lead that ministry, or pastor that church, or whatever, lead that organization. But truly, leaders, this is what leaders do. You help people see something that they've never seen before, and then you take them where they've never gone before.
Yeah, that's good.
And so all the years of Teen Mania, we were always doing this. Hey, what about moving to Texas? What about the first stadium event? What about no one's ever done that before? No one's ever done that before. Even my own staff. I remember when we first moved to Texas. Some of you guys maybe remember when we moved down. It was there was a great moment where we've been planning, doing due diligence, and the whole leadership team were excited, but kind of a little reticent and all of that. Moving their homes, their families, and everything. So there's this great moment where it came down. We had to make the final decision, and I wanted them, even though I had the authority to do it, the board was on board with it. I wanted them to be together in it. So I said, listen, we talked about all the data, all the pros and cons, all of this kind of thing. I said, listen, even if you guys don't have enough faith, it's okay. I have enough faith for all of us. I know this is what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And it was like the whole team galvanized together, and it was just a great season. And there are other seasons that kind of thing happened. So I would just encourage you as a leader, first of all, make sure your team is together. That you may not have all the answers, but you say, we're going to do this together, and you get your leadership team and even the family of your church, the core members say, we're going to invent the future together. We're going to explore together. We're going to figure this out together. We're going to learn together. But it does kind of demand a different sort of requirement. We're going to learn. We're going to keep learning. We're going to see how other people are doing it. And it doesn't mean we're going to copy them blindly, but we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Other people are learning, have learned. And so taking people, this is what leaders are designed to do, go into uncharted territory, and so much of what we see in ministry hasn't been reinvented for a long time. Starting a church hasn't been reinvented. So even mega churches used to be a novelty, 40 years ago, but now they're everywhere. And so, but now this thing is forcing us to reinvent. What a great way to think, okay, wait a minute. What is my impact? How do I not just, I caution pastors to think about, because a lot of them are having a lot more online viewership, which is great.
Right.
But be sure you don't get a false positive. That is, wow, we're reaching 5,000 instead of 500. Are you really? Be like 5,000 visitors coming, and it might be for 10 seconds, at your church on Sunday, and then leaving, realizing it's great. It's a new reach. It's a new footprint you have, but it's part of a funnel. You want to get them to take another step towards Christ, and not just giving them after Christ, but then what about discipleship? What about growth? And that's why I love these models of exponential churches around the world, because they're principles that they're using that anybody can use anywhere around the world, that helps you to think through the process that you want people to engage in once they come to Christ. What are you really aiming at in their life and in the church? Like, where do you want it to be in 5 years and in 10 years?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think so many leaders are having that conversation where, they've seen how we've all been thrusted into this. And now as we're reevaluating, as we're shutting ourselves in, as we're doing some interior evaluation, as we're looking at the health of our organization, the health of our teams, we're beginning to ask those questions. And as we're putting things in place, how can we be prepared? Not just, in my world, how can I not just have a series in place, but how can I begin to think outside of maybe being prepared 3-4 weeks? But how can we have things kind of prepared, settled, strategized for 6 months down the road? How can we begin to really, like you're saying, not just stretch yourself wide and long, but how can we go deep? And so I think we're all getting this and beginning to see that it's great to, like the example of that the Google executive said, why do you care so much about, where all your locations are? Where to someone on the outside, and you hit a great point where, and I always try to do this, is you go in, there's times maybe I'm sitting at a barber shop, or someone who doesn't really know me or our world or our church, and I'll just kind of start conversation, and I'll ask, hey, have you, do you go to church or anything? And then I'll say, have you ever heard about Gathering Place Church? And maybe they have or they haven't. And if they have, I'll just kind of ask them questions where they don't know I may be the leader or the pastor there, but you can really get some honest feedback and honest conversation. Maybe what people have heard. And so as a leader, and it's being really a mature leader, being able to take feedback, take, healthy critique and things like that. I think this is a good time for leaders as they're evaluating, pull the right people around you to speak vision, speak life. And that's kind of been the heart through this talk leading through crisis, Ron, that, as pastors are tuning in, as leaders are tuning in and really wrapping their head around this wave that's coming, how can we ride it? But then as maybe a second wave comes, how can we be more prepared? And during these tough times, obviously you've led through tough times, just the the logistics of of having a campus where the Honor Academy was, maintaining that for years and years and years, putting together some 30 to 40 stadium events every season for Acquire the Fire. How through the risk taking, through pioneering, through trying things nobody else was doing, what rose up within you to really have that solid foundation of, I know God is with me. I'm going to trust him through this. I know I'm not a perfect leader. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to fail. How did you learn to be resilient, to get back up, to not just get back up and keep your head down, but really to bounce back stronger and continue to trust God and move forward?
Yeah, well, it's being a leader in times when there's everything's calm and it doesn't seem to be doesn't take much gumption to kind of press through that is different than being a vision kind of driven leader. And honestly, I think in the past world, parachurch leaders they started because there's a vision of something that needs to happen that the church isn't doing. And maybe churches thought, or pastors thought, well, I don't need to really be vision driven unless I'm just starting a church from scratch, because there's a church in the community, I'm taking it over, we're going to reach people and minister to people. But I think this new season is demanding all of us have to be vision driven. Like, how do we have a vision for the future in the midst of all these changes? And I would really caution that the change is not that we're all using a cell phone to have church now. That's not the change. Right. And it's not the change that we had this pandemic spread so quick. It's great that we're able to see how something starts so small and within a few months has affected the whole world. That's exponential thinking. But it demands a kind of a different way instead of thinking linearly, thinking exponentially. And it's really a different skill set, and try to unpack that. I will say that during crisis that we had, and it's not bad to have crisis. We had crisis all different seasons of Teen Mania. That we'd always, sometimes it's a financial crisis, sometimes it's a leadership crisis, sometimes it's an attendee crisis. There's all kinds of different crises we had. I would encourage you, if you're a business leader or a pastor, you have to think about taking care of your people, whoever work for you, and those that that you care for, whether they're in your church or whatever. There's two dimensions of it. You have to lead yourself, like understand how do you process, how do you lead in the midst of this, but then you have to process how do you help them in the process, because they've lost their job. Right. What about homeschooling? I don't know how to do that. Our kid's going to lose 4 months of school. I mean, people, and so you're leading yourself. You're thinking, how do I lead the church into the future? But you have to deal with people right where they're at right now. One of the present things you're going to need to really look at is like, how much cash do you have? How much at all your present expenses and present inflow, has that changed at all? How do you monitor that? Are there any new revenue streams of giving, or things that you could do that would stimulate people to give, and that kind of thing? I'm not talking about necessarily begging online and things like that, but you have to be wise about it instead of be blind about it and just trust God for the future. When we would take a big leap, some big initiative, we usually had money in the bank. We knew that even if we did X percent failure in this, we'd still be all right financially, kind of thing. Yeah. So we wouldn't take a big leap unless we knew there was enough, wherewithal to fund it and that kind of thing. So I may have told you this the other day, even when we did our first stadium, we knew that we had built our reserves, that even if we lost $1 million on the first stadium, we'd still be okay. We didn't lose $1 million on it, but that's the kind of strength we had when we stepped off the ledge to do something like that. And so I just encourage people to kind of be saving personally and be saving for your ministries. And so you're ready to take leaps. Also, the great thing about living in this day and age, kind of with this new exponential environment, is you can do a lot more for a lot less money than we ever dreamed of 10 or 20 years ago. A lot more for a lot less investment. So in terms of exponential impact, let me just plant a seed here. Think about this. Right now, there's about 4 billion people online. In 5 years, there'll be about 8 billion. Wow. So it took 30 years to get to 4 billion. And then in 5 more years, we'll double that. Now, just if you're a leader, just try to wrap your mind around that. Like, why does that matter to you? If you're in America, probably everybody's already online. But imagine this, the global community is going to get doubled. I mean, people are going to be invited into this community. 4 billion. Now businesses are looking, well, 4 billion more people to buy my stuff, my widgets. There's also be 4 billion more creators out there because you can have a phone and start a business, right? Yeah. But think about this from a ministry point of view. There are going to be 4 billion brand new people that have never seen a video on a phone, never read something. What's the first thing they're going to read? The first thing they're going to see? Maybe something from your church, Garrett, or from somebody else's churches, because you have the impact, the ability to impact 1 billion people right there from your office. And so we have to think like this rather than just the people in our community. All of them are important, but we live in a different world that allows whatever the Lord is doing inside us to touch a lot more lives.
That's wonderful. And Ron, I just want to thank you for imparting those truths, for really pouring your heart out into this book, Faith at the Speed of Light. I actually recently, probably about 3 months ago, I pulled it off the shelf, but I have your book, Resilient, and revisited that. Really you pouring your heart out into that, sharing, the crisis you went through there and how you really learned to bounce back and really confront. And I think that book segued greatly into Faith at the Speed of Light, because feel good faith really doesn't get you through a pandemic or a crisis, but it's that which is bedrock, and that's which has been deposited in your life. I always like to go back. I've been studying book of Genesis, story of Joseph, where they prepared in the time of plenty so that they were ready and could lead and help and serve in the time of famine. Right. And so really again, going back to kind of how we started this conversation of what has been, crisis doesn't make you, crisis reveals you. So again, seeing the paradox in that and trying to say, okay, I've been brought back to where my reality is, like you're saying, with kind of getting, oh my gosh, if we're getting all these viewership on our online services, or maybe I have a blog and more people are clicking in, but not getting a unrealistic reality, thinking, okay, all these people are visiting my website, all these kind of things, but really thinking, okay, there's an opportunity here. How can I then create the funnel to turn it into someone being led in a sinner's prayer, or someone now getting discipleship or a part of an e-group, different things like that. So I think through your book, Faith at the Speed of Light, there's a lot of great truths, and really to encourage the leader that feels at times where you're treading water, you're bogged down trying to maintain what you have, but really through learning to thrive and ride the wave, you can then begin to look up again, see that horizon of hope that you talk about, and begin to dream, begin to be fueled, see the opportunity, and ride the wave instead of allowing the wave of innovation, technology to really pin you down and take your influence, make you ineffective. So I would encourage everyone, I'm currently reading it right now, but all the case studies, really the years of ministry experience you have, Ron, I think it can encourage young leaders. It can encourage pastors who have had to tune in and get a website, get an app built, get their live stream going. I think it just will be a great conversation starter. And really all the pastors you and I have been talking about, that we want to try to find the pastors that have gone through the Honor Academy, pastors that have attended ATFs, get them plugged into this exponential pastors group, so that really conversation can start. Talk about a funnel, that this can be a funnel for leaders and pastors to throw ideas off of each other. Solomon says there's nothing new under the sun. So when you can collaborate and get together, then it's pretty amazing when leaders begin to encourage one another and share ideas, what can come through that. But I really appreciate you taking the time, spending, really encouraging leaders, reconnecting with those that have been to ATFs and alumni of the Honor Academy in the past. Before we go, Ron, if you would just share one last word of encouragement, and then if you could just say a blessing to every leader going through this time, and just say a word of prayer.
Well, let me just, this whole idea of the sons of Issachar understood the times. One of the profound nuances of what we're experiencing right now. I just wrote an article about this last week, and that is that because of the pandemic, it's the first time that both the millennials and the Gen Zs have had something that has fundamentally rocked financially, both in America and around the world. My job, my future. I would have heard maybe from my parents or grandparents about the Dust Bowl or the Great Depression and all of that, and even now, millennials, 9/11, what was that? They didn't even know that, and that didn't last very long. But this is this global kind of this shaking of what I built my life on is not secure. Just the fear is actually worse than the disease, than the virus itself, COVID-19, and what it's done to economies around the world. But that creates a moment for us in ministry that, great, I'm glad these things have shaken, because you built your life on the wrong things. If this has caught you into fear, it means you built your life on the wrong things anyways. And let's make sure that we seize this moment, because there's an openness for both millennials and Gen Zs all around the world that maybe we have never had and maybe never will have again. And so let's make sure we're going after them, both reaching and discipling them in ways that we've never even conceived of before in terms of effectiveness, and making sure they're hardcore disciples and not just singing rah rah Jesus and then living whatever way they want. So let me just take a minute and pray for you guys. Father, I just thank you for the leaders watching, the alumni watching, Lord, those that are aspiring leaders in business and ministry. Lord, would you just help us all to become like the sons of Issachar? The moment that we have, be the most effective that we can possibly be, so that we know what we ought to do to bring you the most glory with our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, Garrett. Amen. God bless you, my friend.
Thank you, Ron. We appreciate it.